Every year, hundreds of people go missing under baffling conditions in the woods of North America. Linda and Eddie decided to go for a walk in the park. They stepped off of the trail and got turned around. But it's broad daylight and they figured, okay, we'll find the trail soon. But as the sun was setting, they had still not found the trail and they realized they were badly lost. Then some very strange things happened that we only have a marginal understanding of. What we know is the brother and sister were together on that first day they went missing. We know they were together the following day, still looking around for a way out of the park, but still at the end of the day were lost. Then the next day, we know the pair separated because Eddie re-emerged out of the park, hopped in his car like nothing was going on, drove back to his house, walked inside, and his family's like, where have you been? You've been missing. Where's Linda? And he's like, oh, everything's fine. I dropped Linda off at a relative's house. She's fine too. But as they asked him more questions about specifically, how did you get lost? Specifically, what time did you drop Linda off? Tell us all the details. As they did that, Eddie started to realize that, oh my goodness, I actually don't know what happened. And so his family called this relative that Eddie had claimed he dropped Linda off at. And when the relative picked up, they said, no, we don't have Linda here. I've not spoken to Eddie and I've not spoken to Linda. And so the family turns back to Eddie and they're like, where's Linda? And Eddie just said, I have no idea. And so the family contacts police and a search is launched for Linda. And they look all over this park for days and days and there's no sign of Linda. And people are starting to get really worried about her. And then on Thursday, so 3 days after Eddie had re-emerged from the park, some searchers that were on ATVs were about 2 miles away from the entrance of the park in this very thick area. And they found Linda and she was alive. And initially, just like her brother Eddie, she really had no idea what was going on. She said she didn't understand how she got where she was and she was just really confused. And so they brought her back to the hospital and they put her under doctor's care and she ended up being fine. But as she's laying in the hospital, she starts kind of coming to and her memories start flooding back. And she tells this story of what happened to her and it's unbelievable. She said she and Eddie went into the park. They got turned around, they were lost, and they were confident they were going to find the trail and get out the same day, but they didn't. And so the sun went down and they were forced to sleep out in the wild. And so the next morning they get up and they continue to look around. They're yelling for help and there's no one around. They're in this very dense part of the forest. And all day, again, they're looking for this trail and they don't find it. And so that night, again, they sleep out in the wild. Linda said her memory, starting with the next day, which was Monday, started to get really foggy. She said she woke up and for some reason she just got up and started running into the woods. She thinks it's because she thought Eddie was hurt and she was running to get help. And so it must have been around this time that Eddie, in his dazed state, got up and meandered his way successfully out of the park. Meanwhile, Linda said she was just running like a maniac into the middle of the woods, screaming for help from someone, even though she's in the middle of nowhere. And then miraculously, she says she saw a group of people way off in the distance. It looked like a group of hikers. And she started yelling for them and waving to them and trying to get their attention. And she said they all stopped and turned to look at her, but they didn't show any sign that they had actually heard her. They were not trying to interact with her. They were just looking at her. Linda said she thought that was pretty odd, but she just kept on running towards them and screaming and yelling and trying to get their attention. And she said when she got about 100 meters away from them, they all ducked behind trees like they were trying to hide from Linda. Linda said this was the first time she felt really unsettled by what was happening, but she was desperate. She needed help. And so she just kept walking towards them. And she got to about 50 meters away when they all poked their heads out and looked out at her and then poked their heads back. Like they were not trying to interact with her. And Linda said she felt really scared and stopped and began backpedaling away from this weird group of people that are hiding behind trees. And so while keeping her eyes on the general area where she knew they were hiding, she backpedaled all the way back to about 100 to maybe 150 meters away again. And this group came out from behind the trees and continued to stare at Linda. Linda said at this point she was terrified. She didn't know who or what those things were, but they were not there to help her. And then she said her memory got really foggy because all of a sudden her next memory is her laying on the ground in this pitch black forest. Her brother's not near her and she's hearing footsteps and she believes it's this group of people or things that are walking towards her, but it's so dark she can't see anything. And she said all night she heard the sounds of these people or things walking around the perimeter of where she was laying, totally exposed in the middle of the forest. Linda said her memories from this point until she was rescued are all mixed together, but she said she had one memory that really stood out to her because it was so terrifying. She said on one of the last mornings she was out there, she woke up, she was laying on the ground, she opens her eyes, and it was still dark, but the sun was starting to come up. And so there was enough light that she could begin to make out the layout of the forest. And so she sat up and immediately got got the sense that she was being watched, but she didn't know by who or from where it was coming. She hears movement coming off to her right, and she turns, and standing next to a tree about maybe 20 meters away is this dark silhouette of a man who's just staring at her. He's got no features. He's just this shadowy figure. And so she's horrified, and then she realizes there's another one, and she looks at that one and realizes there's another one and another one and another one. They're all around her. As she's looking around at all of them, it seems like they registered that she sees them. And at that point, they all turned and start running into the forest in all different directions. She said after that, she has no idea the sequence of events or what happened. All she knows is that the whole time she was out there, she was scared. She felt like there were people watching her in the woods. And then at some point, rescuers showed up and she was saved. Linda's totally crazy account of what happened, combined with Eddie's bizarre behavior, totally baffled investigators. One theory is they must have eaten berries or some other food item that had hallucinogenic properties, and they were literally just hallucinating the whole time. However, if you follow along with David Paulides' missing 411 phenomenon, and you know there are lots of other examples of people that go missing in the woods of North America that never ingest any food or any liquid, so there's no hallucinogen in their system, and they still have similar experiences to what Linda and Eddie did. So how do you explain that? Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.